according to exclusive reports from Deadline, the Mike Flanagan-penned solo Clayface film seems to be on track to meet its targeted September 2026 release date, with DC leadership set to hear pitches from potential filmmakers next week. Two noteworthy names are rising to the top as candidates to helm the rumored horror tragedy, including Speak No Evil's James Watkins and Truth or Dare's Jeff Wadlow, with the expectation that casting will quickly follow suit once a director is locked in. James Gunn has described the film as a DCU project, but it is still unclear whether it will connect to any existing projects or continuity. Do we have preferences as to which Potter will have their turn at the wheel?
This is starting to feel a little bit like a Jurassic World Rebirth situation. Initially, when I saw, September 2026 as a release for this thing when we first started talking about it, I did not know how feasible that was. Now that we're at this point, still seems, like they might be cutting it kind of close. Depends on how big a film this is. But with the two directors at play here, I think there is a strong case to be made for the fact that this might be a smaller budget movie, maybe not as many of those special effects. Maybe those are just reserved for a few transformation sequences, what have you. So going into this, I did not really have much of a preference between James Watkins and Jeff Wadlow. I knew I was familiar with James Watkins' work in Speak No Evil, but I had not seen Truth or Dare. But when I look at Jeff Wadlow's filmography here, I actually think maybe he might be a better candidate. It's not a super impressive filmography here, but there are a couple of standouts for me. Kick-Ass 2, which I think is better than a lot of other people do. He's also got Fantasy Island and last year's Imaginary. So just in terms of being able to do something a little more high concept as compared to James Watkins, who I really don't recognize anything that he's done other than Speak No Evil. So I'm kind of leaning towards Wadlow here. So we were talking a little bit offline, like what kind of movie is this actually going to be? And I don't think it's going to be horror light. Like I think it's going to be full on horror. The fact that we got Mike Flanagan, who has become such a household name as far as horror goes, and then these two directors are kind of the top choices. I think there's a strong case to be made that this is going to be a straight up horror film, a la like The Substance or something like that, which I'd definitely be looking forward to. Now, in terms of casting, I really have no idea, but I think if you look at these filmmakers, with the exception of James Watkins having worked with James McAvoy on Speak No Evil, like that's kind of the highest profile person in the proceedings here, but he did work with Scoot McNairy on that same movie. So even if it ends up being Jeff Wadlow or James Watkins, like Scoot McNairy kind of emerged as like a potential candidate or somebody like that, somebody that's kind of like a little more squirrely character actor that I could really buy as like having these desires to potentially inject themselves with something that, will have terrible, terrible consequences. But I think Clayface is a super interesting character. We've had a lot of adaptations. I'll dance around spoilers for Creature Commandos, but I will be inherently interested to see if this does connect to Creature Commandos and if we get some confirmation about the fate of the character that we saw in that series.
I'm still just excited for this movie for some reason. I think it's the pathos of Clayface. Like, he's such an interesting character. Scotty, you're right. There's a thread to be pulled there from Creature Commandos. What it will be, we don't know. But it's just interesting. Like, John Jackson Miller released at the end of last year a book called Batman Resurrection, and it takes place between the Michael Keaton Batman movies 1 and 2. And Clayface is a character in it that has a pretty pivotal role. And it's done in such a way that like you just really feel for that character. So I think there's a very cool opportunity to do the man behind the monster kind of Jekyll and Hyde type thing that is inherent with Clayface, but make it really like empathetic and yet horror at the same time.
Yeah, Flanagan has described it as a tragedy. Like it's this kind of like fall of a man sort of tragic story, like fall of a person type thing. And The Substance seems like the best comparison here, right? I mean, it's this idea of like this like kind of body horror type thing and that sort of genre. And that seems like a good connection. I mean, we see what The Substance is doing. It's getting into the Oscar conversation. It's getting, Demi Moore all this spotlight. Like, clearly there's a connection to be made there between this type of story and that type of story. And so I think, like, as we look forward, I mean, we've talked about it before. James Gunn has been on the record, like, he wants his studio to be creative focused, and he wants to empower creators, and he wants to be like, oh, you want to tell a straight up horror movie? You don't have to fit a certain formula. And those were words back then, but now we really get to see if there's action behind those words as we start to move into the actual DCU, and we start to see some of these projects take shape. So this will be a good litmus test, right? To kind of see, does it have to match the DC formula? Is there a DC formula? Or are we going to really let Mike Flanagan be Mike Flanagan and do something really out there and true horror? And I think people will respond well to that. Like, I think that idea of it's not super connected. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to tease a sequel at the end. You don't have to bring Batman into it or whatever. It can just be a story that Mike Flanagan wanted to tell because he wanted to tell it. I think people are going to connect with that a little bit.
Yeah. I could absolutely see this being the next Joker, like the next... obviously, Clayface is not as well-known a character as Joker is, but I feel like Clayface is a very common Batman villain in almost every iteration, and you think about, like, when I think about the animated series, which is, I think, our generation grew up on, his episodes are very memorable episodes and things. It's just a character a lot of us know, even if he's not the premier villain of a Batman thing. So I really think this could be that next sort of like breakout movie for DC that it doesn't have to be connected to anything. And I love Mike Flanagan. I will always love him from Midnight Mass. And I'm really, really hopeful that this will be as good as that was, because that's the only thing I really know Mike Flanagan has done. And I think it's one of my favorite things I've seen. So I'm hoping that, I'm torn about the directors. Like, I like the fact that they're horror directors because it will be a horror movie, which I think is good to really make it a genre piece. But also, as much as Midnight Mass was a horror thing, it was elevated horror, really, really elevated. And so I'm hoping that these directors can take Mike Flanagan's work and make that happen here as well. Yeah. And as for who it should be, come on, at least give Alan Tudyk a
shake,
a chance at that role. Like, let him audition, because I think he has very different modes, and he's already played this character in multiple universes. I would love to see him get in there and do a completely different version, and I think he could be great as a body horror Clayface.
Hey, we know he's in Superman. We don't know how or what or why, but we know that he is in Superman in some form.
True.
And I wonder where Clayface falls on the Madam Web Joker scale. Because,
Yikes. The yikes meter?
We want it to do better than Joker Folia do and Craven.
Yeah.
We'll see.
No, I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Like, if you're DC, you're like, how do we make this movie not a Sony movie? I mean,
exactly.
It has to stand apart, and it has to get good reviews out of the gate, or people will simply just not see it.
Yeah.
Because
that's not why those movies failed. Come on, didn't you hear the guy from Sony?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not me, it's you. You can't understand my elevated stuff.
Girls don't like superheroes. We all know that.
Yeah, it's a woman
We've
problem.
seen toy aisles. They're separated for a reason.
They killed the Flash, and they're going to come for Clayface next.
Oh, shoot.
With what you just said, Jay, bringing up the Flash again, it reminded me how one of the worst criticisms of the Flash was how some of the CG looked like claymation almost, and they could kind of lean into that with this movie if they wanted to. Like, hey, let's save on the VFX a little bit. We want it to look mushy.
Mushy?
I think if they want this movie to be really horror, they need to do as much practical as they can with Clayface. Even though he's the big morphing creature, you got to get that like visceral in the room feeling for that. The transformations, I think.
I wonder how much they'll lean into that. It could be like we've compared it to The Substance again. Like, we might not see that hulking beast until the very end. Like, I imagine it starts off like, this is kind of a good thing. Like, as an actor, I can change my face, and this is actually working out pretty well for me, but it has consequences.
I won't spoil anything, but in that vein, don't sleep on Batman Resurrection. That book is really, really good, especially if you love the Tim Burton Batman movies.
Okay.
Cool. speaking on the Madam Web of it all, the Sonyverse thing, DC has so far been successful with its Joker movies being, disconnected, and really just being able to make some disconnected decisions. But we haven't seen what will happen with Superman or whatnot. And the fact that it's technically right now disconnected from Batman. But I think the thing is, if you're going to make a standalone movie, that character has to have some sort of following. It has to have some sort of love for that character. If you're going to make the decision to make it a separate, pull it out. So many of the Spider-Man characters work in a Spider-Man movie, but they don't work by themselves.
Sure.
And they don't, there's not big Madam Web fans out there. There's not throngs of them anyway. And there's not huge Morbius fans, not throngs of them anyway. There's people who like those characters in comics, but it just doesn't have the same constituency, as it were. Weird word for it. I think this has the chance because I think a lot of people grew up with this character in one form or another. No pun intended.
Horror movies are low budget too. I mean, you can do this thing probably for a low budget. It doesn't have to have the big blockbuster superhero movie budget that we're used to seeing with Marvel and DC. It can get a little smaller. Like you said, practical effects look better and they're cheaper than doing all of the CGI and the editing and all of that type of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the director, that's part of your pitch. I mean, you're saying, I can keep this budget pretty low, like a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's got the DC weight behind it, and it has
great
possible connections to DCU, however much or little connections you want to have. And let me fly, and I think from there you can, you can put together a pitch that works for all parties.
All right, now hold me back while I talk to James Gunn. Hold me back. James Gunn, you better not play with the idea that this might be connected if it's not. Just be freaking honest with the viewers that this is it's an Elseworlds tale or it's connected. If you do the whole the Flash
might matter if it is or isn't. All the way up until opening night, we're going to be speculating on whether or not it is.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason for that is James Gunn likes to play those games.
He does. He loves it.
Don't do that. That pisses us off. It is dangling a thing in front of us we want, which is connectivity, and then pulling it away if it's not going to be connected. And I don't make us be thinking about whether this movie's connected the whole time. Let us live in the movie and enjoy its artistic vision, Yeah. The only time that ever worked was in Split. That surprise connected universe was awesome. Anybody? Split?
Oh yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Love that connection at the end.
Too bad they shat the bed with glass, but yeah.
I know. You just watched a clip from Multiverse News. If you liked it, go to our channel. We got a whole episode that it comes from. So go check that out and hit the like and subscribe. And we got lots of clips you'll enjoy, but also full hour-long episodes of Multiverse News with lots of things that don't even make it to clips. So check us out.
You stay clippy.